Hi, it's János, it's Real World Audio, and I want to follow up on a question that I received for my latest video. And that question is from Mr. Byrne, and it is about something that would be highly interesting. So I will read out the question. Hi János, a question that connects to many of your videos about listening on lower volumes. What parameters in a driver gives the possibility to get a full and detailed listening on low volume sound pressure level? Is it only the driver's high efficiency, or is it a combination of high efficiency and QMS, QTS or other TLS parameters? I want to build a three-way speaker that Bloom opens up and gives a musical engagement on lower volumes, and the ESS Hill AMT tweeter is chosen, but I can't see what 8-inch mid or and 15-inch woofer I should get. Thank you. And my answer to that, I would go with my own observations. I think probably others have other observations as well, but what I've noticed is that when we listen at lower volumes, then that's where single drivers become a lot more capable than multi-way systems. And I know that this opposition between single driver speakers and multi-driver speakers has been raging on for many years and decades, and each of them have their own supporters, even apostles, or how do you want to call them? Well, in a few words, people who just love what they do and love what they experience, and they share it with others. That's what they are. And what I have noticed with my experience is that when I listen to at medium volumes or low listening levels, then actually the lower you get in volume, the more the bandwidth that you hear shrinks. So at mid to low levels, you don't hear extreme high frequencies and you don't hear low bass. So it's really, when you're listening to low volumes, then it's like 60 hertz to 16 kilohertz is what you are hearing, because the music is not loud enough to make the perception of very deep bass audible, or to make the perception of extreme high frequencies audible. And when we go drop in volume, the more and more optimized a single driver speaker becomes for that volume. And really we only need a multi-way system when the SPL, when the volumes are loud enough that the cone excursion becomes limiting for a single driver system to expand it to louder volumes. And I think that's pretty much the main reason one would want to go for a multi-way system. So yes, that's my main experience, that if you want a system that not just it can do low volume good music, but it's the forte of that system, so it's where it excels. The single drivers have been by far better at low volumes than my multi-way system, and I would say that they present a very different perspective, because, for example, when I compare my voice of Lancelot, which excels at, I would say, at any listening volume, but its strength becomes apparent at normal to extremely loud, that it can handle really large scale presentation. However, when with the voice of Lancelot I go to low volumes and super low volumes, I have something very peculiar, is that for example, when I'm listening to an orchestra, even when I turn the volume very low, it still stays a gigantic sound. It's like a full-blown orchestra, but the volume control, it behaves in a very peculiar way. So it's not like the volume is turned down, but it's like I am getting further and further away from the orchestra. So it's so as I turn the volume down, what I experienced is that I'm getting further away from the stage, and when I turn the volume up, I'm getting closer to the stage and closer to the musicians, and everything becomes more vibrant. There's more life, there's more intensity in it. And as I turn down the volume, the intensity goes lower, and also it feels that I'm listening to a live event, but from a further and further distance. So for example, if I look at a piano, then at a loud listening level, the piano is in my living room right in front of me, and then someone is playing on that invisible piano in the living room. And as I'm turning down the volume, the pianist starts to go further and further away. It sounds like there's a piano next room. And then if I turn, so I'm having the same experience as when I was listening to my sister play in the other room, and I was not in the living room, but I was in my other room, and listening from there, hearing her. And now if I turn the volume down, it's like I'm moving to one more room backwards. Maybe I'm in the kitchen, and there's like a room between me and the piano. And it's getting more and more distant. And when with the voice of Lancelot the volume is really down, it feels like I'm listening to my neighbor playing the piano, and I have a window open, and I'm hearing the sound of the piano coming from outside of the house. But it still feels like a real life, large, hefty piano, but it's far away, and it sounds exactly like that. So it also means that all the tiny details that you would hear, you don't hear them anymore, because in real life, when you hear someone playing next door, you don't have that kind of resolution and detail level as if you are in your room listening to a piano. So that's why it is realistic in a way. And the volume control with that kind of system, like an ultimate multi-way system, gives you that impression that as you turn the volume down, you are getting further and further away from the event. But that also gives you less and less detail level, I would say, that you hear with the instrument. And when you have a single driver, that gives a very different perspective on it. So the perspective with a single driver is when I listen to a very quiet levels, I still have a very high apparent detail level, and a much higher detail level than what I hear with my voice of Lancelot. However, also that detail level, as I go louder in volume, it increases with the single driver, but then it caps out. And then with the voice of Lancelot, I have a much wider bandwidth of listening at normal to loud volumes. And one more thing is that with the voice of Lancelot, what I hear is that even though it is playing louder, but it doesn't feel louder. when I switch back to other systems or other speakers, or even to other like 2 or 3 way speakers, and listen to them, and I think, wow, now I'm listening to very loud, and then I switch back to the voice of Lancelot, and that one is actually presenting it at a level that it feels actually much quieter, but there's just so much more energy and dynamic range in it that you just don't notice. So actually you can, or maybe not, I don't know if you, but I can talking about myself because I have that speaker in my house. Even if I put it to quite loud volumes like 90 dB peak, it doesn't feel like listening other systems at 90 dB. It feels that it's much quieter, because the range between the quietest sound and the loudest sound is just so much more greater, that the average listening level actually feels even lower than something that's rated at 10 or 20 dB less efficient than what it is. However, when I get the peaks, they just go out of proportion, and they're just like kind of like a tidal wave in the ocean, just washes away anything without pain, without listening fatigue. Now, with the single driver, I have a very, very different perspective on it. The single driver produces a much more intimate experience. So with single driver speakers, I have intimacy, and what I noticed is, and with the voice of Lancelot, I have scale, like tremendous, endless scale, like a real live concert, real live grand piano. They have tremendous scale. A real live orchestra or a real live quartet. Even if you have just like a quartet playing, either a jazz quartet or a classical quartet, like a baroque musicians, those instruments, even a cello, takes up tremendous space, and with the voice of Lancelot, yes, that space is taken up. And when people say, oh, a quartet is just small scale music, who cares, it's just like Muppets in your backyard. No, it's not. A proper quartet is just like a phenomenal big experience. And if it happens to be like a Muppet show in your case, then that system is doing something really poorly, that it shrinks a magnificent quartet to something that's just like kind of like Muppets on a mini stage. However, that's, I would say, a blessing and a limitation for the voice of Lancelot as well, because it presents everything on a grand scale. And even if I'm listening to just one performer, like a single arch lute playing, then even that sounds grand and really tremendous. And if I turn down the volume, the size of the arch lute doesn't shrink down to a tiny arch lute. It stays that big scale, but I'm getting further and further away from that experience. Now, what I noticed for myself, what I want with very quiet listening, because I would say now I'm reframing your question completely. What is it that you want with very quiet listening? And this is my question to everyone. What is your priority? What do you want to achieve? Because I think some people want to achieve that voice of Lancelot type of presentation, that you have that enormous grand scale even when the volume is turned down. Now you can get that grand scale by having a perspective between you and the musicians. And but that perspective will go like further and further away. And you would say that, no, János, you can do it by turning down the volume and they still stay in your room, stay in their same positions. And I say, yes, it can be done, but at the price of skewing the tonality skewing the imaging, skewing the perception, and losing naturalness. If you want to keep the sound natural, then that's what happens. Then when you turn the volume down, you will get further and further away from the musicians. And when you have a system that presents tremendous scale, that scale will be kept at any volume. And that might be something that you are looking for. And really, I do enjoy that. I have to admit it. But what I noticed that what I really like to do is that when I listen to normal volumes or louder, that's when I like to listen to that scale, because that's what we do in our normal lives, normal days, that when you listen to a piano or a pianist or a quartet or music, you tend to be relatively close to them. Maybe next room, right? You don't want to be closer to that. Maybe you like to listen your neighbor playing the piano, and it's an absolutely beautiful, wonderful experience. If you have someone who is a really good pianist or violinist, or if you love saxophone, someone is playing a really good saxophone in your neighbor, then it is a delight to listen to it across the street. Listen to your neighbors. But you also want to try out how is the perspective when you turn down the volume and it still feels that it's still there in your room, and you hear the detail level, but then it won't feel as real as it did with that other grand presentation. It will be more like the typical audiophile presentation. So far what I have described has absolutely nothing to do with the mainstream audiophile systems, how they image. They don't image like that. There's like a couple dozen people on earth, I think, who have gone through the whole audiophile ultra high-end progression, and then they reach the system that's capable of doing that type of thing. Maybe there's more. If there's more, thumbs up and fantastic. But generally, when you listen to high-end discussions, even at the highest high-end, you don't really see that experience folding out. It's more like you have this tremendous pinpoint detail imaging, and at the cost of naturalness. And what I noticed is that when you have a single driver system, it does create a holographic universe which is not altogether artificial. To me, that typical audiophile signature sound that most commercial gears have, for me is just an absolute atrocity to the enjoyment of music, and it just stands between me and the music, and it's like kind of like catches your attention, so that you are caught at focusing on how the system sounds, and you cannot get to music. And I think that when we are listening at low, medium to low to extremely low, ultra low listening levels, that's when single drivers start to shine because of their lack of crossover. And it's true nowadays, when we have like really high quality crossovers, they kind of almost disappear, kind of. However, there's the dichotomy that the louder we listen, the least our ears are capable of hearing faults and problems with the systems. And in many cases, when people listen extremely loud, a lot of the problems of that speaker of the system become hidden, because your brain is overloaded with everything you hear. And once you get more experience listening at high volumes, hearing more systems, then you will be able to tell more and more of the problems. But ultimately, that extreme volume will stay as a boundary between you and the perception of the really, really fine intricacies of the sound and what crossover does to the sound. And what I noticed on myself, that I'm listening to low-level listening, then this happens like in like after midnight, like early AM hours, is that it's up to a point, it's kind of like I'm just listening to the sound, and I hear details coming, and I see like a sound stage and everything happening, but you need to adapt to the quieter music. And once you spend some time with that quieter music, then there's a shift in the perception, and suddenly your ability to hear details and just to see into the sound, just to perceive an incredible level of detail, and then I'm not just saying like detail, but it's almost like turning your hearing on, or like having really dark glasses, and then you take off those really dark glasses, and now suddenly you can see fully, almost like removing a blindfold. That kind of, and when you have that experience that kicks in, after that, single driver speakers, the experience with them opens up to unbelievable levels. And I haven't had this experience with multi-driver systems. Yes, you can build a multi-driver system that you play loud and it sounds enjoyable. And I would say, if it's like a two-way system or three-way, it's much easier to build it and optimize it in a way that when you have 3 or 4 people listening to it, they will all give the thumbs up to the multi-way speaker at the same low SPL listening, because everyone agrees that it sounds better. However, when you are listening to it alone, and then you switch into that mode of listening, then you can switch with the single driver, and it opens up the possibilities with you. And with the multi-driver, even if you switch, the switch is really minor, really minute, and it's not going to give much difference. What I noticed with myself, not just myself but others as well, is when we are together as a group listening to a speaker, then we stay in that what I call as superficial absorption listening mode, which is not absorbing the music, just listening to sound. And when you are by yourself, and then you just go into the alpha state, then suddenly you are able to process what you hear to an extremely higher degree compared to that superficial judgmental level where we judge our audio gears with our bodies when we listen to them. And then that's something normal, that when you are in a group of people, your brain waves stay at the beta state, and you cannot go to alpha, because when you have multiple human beings together, or awareness stays at this acute level where we are much more looking out towards unusual things happening. It's kind of like a group activity that we are engaged, and we are looking out for danger, something is going to happen, and we are very active and hyped up. So when you are hyped up, your greater level of perception of sound doesn't happen. It's blocked. And when that ability is blocked to become immersed into the universe of sound, then a multi-driver system will sound better at any volume level, provided it's optimized for that. And for that, what I would say is that adding a woofer, like coming back to the question here, like the AMT tweeter, air motion tweeter, and adding an 8-inch driver and a 15-inch driver, I would say if you add an 8-inch driver, that would be perfect with the tweeter for a low volume listening. If you also add the woofer, that just adds another layer where you are smearing, where you are crossing it over, and the more point you add and cross over at lower volumes, it's just going to introduce a break into like kind of like a tear, like when you're snapping like a continuity apart. And we usually don't observe this breakage in the sound because we optimize our crossovers for loud to extremely loud listening. However, I would say theoretically, I haven't done it myself, but probably you could do that, to add like a mid-range driver and a woofer, like an 8-inch and a 15-incher, and then optimize the crossover to low volumes. But then it won't sound nice at playing loud. It will sound off when you play loud. And the reason for that is that different drivers work different at different SPLs. And like when you have a tweeter and you have a mid-range driver and a woofer, these guys have different, each of them have their own characteristics of playing at quietly, at mid-volume and high volumes. And when you build a crossover, it needs to align these three at the SPL you are using your speaker. When you drop the SPL drastically to low listening levels, the alignment has to be very different between these three drivers to balance them out. And that's why you normally do not observe, or I have not observed, multi-way speakers having being as exceptionally good low-level listening devices, because they are optimized for high SPLs. And this is the world we live in today. Everything is optimized to something to the extreme level. And when you see these multi-driver speakers and their ability to play extremely well at extremely loud SPLs, it means they are optimized there, and they will absolutely fail at providing that level of integrity and coherence as another speaker that is optimized for quiet listening level. And I think probably if you take care of tweaking your crossover, especially at the levels at which the drivers play, to optimize it to low listening level, probably you can do it, and you can vastly improve the ability how that speaker plays at very low listening levels. But you have to observe that as you drop the SPL, the ability of our ears to hear, to perceive low frequencies and high frequencies, it vanishes. Our ears or listening becomes very limited. And when, as I'm not bringing up the Fletcher-Munson curves, but when you go to like extremely low level listening, then basically it's like 100 hertz to 7-8 kilohertz. That's all that we can hear. And if we want a woofer pushing more to that, it's you won't hear the 20 hertz, you won't hear the 30 hertz, you won't even feel it. But what you will hear is that all of those artifacts that it's producing, that ripples into the mid-range, and the tiniest ripples into the mid-range will be a lot more distracting, a lot more will bring a lot more penalty to the music compared to the gains that we would have with the deep frequencies. And we have to be really mindful that our awareness, how we perceive sound and music, is extremely different at very low levels compared to high levels. At high levels, we are driven by dynamics. We are driven by the feeling, the what you feel in your body, with the bass, with deep bass resonating in your body. You feel the high frequencies just swimming in your room. And when you listen to very quiet levels, it has to be exceptional clarity in the mid-range, because all you hear is mid-range. Your ears are not capable of hearing low and high frequencies at quiet volumes, but you are capable of hearing that mid-range extremely acutely, and provided that you switch, you can go into that state of awareness, into that relaxed state of awareness where you can perceive those low detail levels, those and it's just something phenomenal. I hope there's many of you who can relate to that, who had experience like that, slipping into that mode. It's kind of at the border where you are falling asleep. It's almost like falling asleep, but you are still awake. And then you notice that your hearing is just suddenly almost like 100 or 1,000 times more sensitive in a blink of an eye. It's not like a gradual change. It's like someone flipped a switch on, and you can hear unbelievable clarity. And however, that unbelievable clarity, what I experienced myself, has exclusively come only for single driver speakers. When it's multi-driver speaker, I can still hear more of it, but the clarity is not there. It's like a tiny fraction. It's kind of like a splash compared to a tsunami. So I think that's my take on what you can do about speakers, and what speakers are optimal at low to extremely low listening levels. But apart from that, if we are not thinking just the speakers, it is utmost crucial, the amplifier. The amplifier has to have extremely low sound floor. I hope everyone is familiar with the term sound floor, because whenever people are talking about amplifiers, they are talking about noise floor, and the noise is the noise level of the system. But whether that system can resolve musical detail levels down to the noise floor, that's not a given. Usually what we experience is that there are systems, especially nowadays modern class D amps, which boast noise floors like minus 132 dB, but their sound floor is just a tiny fraction of that. And those sounds which should be very low, like 60, 70, 80, 90 dB below the peak level, they are not there. But they are either gone, non-existing, or they have been compressed up to much higher levels. That's what I experience. And the number of the amplifiers that preserved a wide dynamic range, especially at low playing levels, I haven't seen any commercial amplifier like that. Maybe there are, but I haven't experienced myself. Partly because usually when you are listening at someone's place, everyone is blaring them, playing them loud, but whenever I got the chance to play them quietly, it has to be an amplifier that can play really low. I would say in most cases, if you have like a single-ended tube amplifier from a reputed manufacturer, they do have the ability to play at this extremely low level and bring through that detailed experience. So when your attention switches, you still get that extreme range that is contained in the music, in the recording. But what I noticed with solid state amplifiers is that solid state amplifiers generally fail extremely at low level listening. While yes, it's true that they can deliver a lot of power into especially power hungry speakers at high volumes, but at low volumes their sound floor is just way too high and doesn't allow that extreme range at these tiny volumes. There are exceptions though. I think some of you remember that I was talking about the Micro E audio amplifier, and yes, that Micro E audio amplifier, which is a class A solid state amplifier, is exceptionally good at playing extremely low level. Yes, it can. But apart from that, I haven't experienced any solid state amplifier having that low noise floor. Not even the big Conrad Johnson solid state amp, that SA350. It has more juice than the Micro E, but it cannot play quietly, and I haven't experienced anything else that comes anywhere close to the Micro E solid state amps. So I think that's my answer, long and short. Thank you for asking this question, and please share your experiences. What are your experiences? How you found that playing at low volumes worked out well? What were the benefits or no benefits? And I would say, Mr. Byrne, what I would suggest with your AMT tweeter is have an 8-inch single driver as your main driver, and have the AMT tweeter complement that single driver for that extremely low level listening, and I think that will give you the experience you are looking for. And I would have the AMT tweeter firing up and your driver maybe like a Sonido or a Cube Audio that's firing at you, and I think that would give the ultimate extremely low level listening experience. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.